What's up? It's the Coaster Craze, and this is part 3, the final part of the 3-part video essay my friend Blake and I are doing on Bolliger & Mabillard and its evolution as a company. This will be covering the 2010s and beyond, mainly covering kind of the complacency and the suggestions we have for it to really come back into the forefront of the coaster industry. So if you haven't checked out the first 2 parts yet, link is in the description for both of them because it'll make a whole lot more sense when we discuss it in this 3rd part. So enjoy. The 2010s decade actually started on a pretty high note for B&M. Well, it transitioned to it because after the 2000s we saw kind of a decrease in innovation as more of the parks were filled out. 2011 brought the next new concept for B&M, and that was the Wing Coaster, which was the first one, Raptor, at Gardaland in Italy. Again, this was not a new model for the coaster industry, as Intamin did it with Furious Baco at Portaventura in 2007, but that was a really intense low-to-the-ground launch coaster with only one inversion, very different type of coaster, and this was very graceful, smooth, inversions focused, kind of spread out, not super compact usually, and this kind of became B&M's most popular model of the past decade.
The Raptor in particular was pretty innovative for B&M because it's one of the first times where B&M was involved in a very highly themed roller coaster, because a lot of B&Ms aren't that highly themed, but there's theming everywhere in Raptor and so many near misses.
That's a great point in that I think wing coasters were a really great potential because even though the rides aren't like the best, at least enthusiasts say, they bring in a lot of crowds because they're like crowd pleasers, and they have great opportunities for highly themed thrill coasters by using the near misses. For example, Thunderbird's shed, you could call it. I know the Swarm at Thorpe Park is very highly themed with that kind of like zombie apocalypse feel.
Gatekeeper isn't themed at all, but like the keyhole element is spectacular.
So then in 2012 they actually went in a very good direction too with Leviathan, which was their first Giga coaster. Again, this is not a new model, and this was still counted as their hyper coaster model, but this is their first time doing it over 300 feet, and it was very well received. But of course they would improve that a few years later. Other thing to note with 2012 is X-Flight at Six Flags Great America was their final coaster they did with Six Flags. And I think that's a big deal because Six Flags was one of their biggest customers for so long. I mean, Six Flags Great America, that was the park where their first coaster was built and the original Batman the Ride was built. So for that relationship to kind of fall through, just because of the sheer cost of B&Ms, was a bit unfortunate. Of course, though, we have to keep in mind Chinese parks were willing to pay these high prices, and that kept on happening throughout this decade, and that really boomed in the early 2010s. But we saw that, of course, the American parks, less and less were built because these price tags were just insane, and even with the cheapest models, which are probably dive coasters and wing coasters, just because they're traditionally shorter tracks, they were like the most popular of the past decade, but they're still minimum like $15 to $20 million, which is crazy when you can get a great RMC for like $10 million.
And like GCIs are so cheap, like
yeah,
$6 million,
exactly.
$7 million.
And yeah, I think that really shows. I mean, like White Lightning at Fun Spot America, that's got to be like $6-7 million, and a lot of people, it brings in a lot of crowds, just like a B&M. I mean, maybe not the same amount, but again, just, the price, the cost versus like the return investment maybe didn't seem as good, though there's still, of course, the reliability factor. But then 2015, a few years later, they did have another year of a little bit of advancement. Fury 325, not a new type of coaster, obviously, but it was the biggest coaster, still is, that B&M's made, and tallest, fastest, and longest, and it's also the best B&M coaster according to most people, and one of the best in the world. So that was great to see them kind of like really putting like a mark in the modern coaster scene by like kind of mixing their old-fashioned like big airtime floater hills with like the low to the ground intensity of some of these others like the Intamin Gigas or like RMCs. So I think that was cool, but the problem is that besides Fury, I wouldn't really say B&M has been the discussion of like the big just like best new coasters for the past 10 years.
The other notable one for the last 10 years is probably Thunderbird. That's probably one of
Yeah,
the
also
other big
2015.
innovations of B&M, but other than that, they didn't really innovate and they're not really out there that much getting as recognized as they once were.
It's true, yeah, exactly. Like Thunderbird, that was great. That was their first time doing a launch coaster and a launch system. And again, 2010s is even more popular with launch coasters in the past decade. I mean, you see rides like Max 4s, all these premier coasters just keep on gaining like popularity. And then, of course, I think 2016, they redid Hulk with their own launch system. But besides those two attractions and the 2021 Universal Beijing Hulk clone that's going to be themed to Transformers, there's been no B&M launch coasters. So clearly, that market isn't very popular for them. Same thing with family coasters, which they actually did try to introduce. Also, this was in 2014 with the family inverted model at Happy Valley Shanghai. And I think they've only sold like 2 or 3 of those, likely due to probably a higher price. But family coasters is a big market because every park wants a couple probably. And even the smaller parks that usually wouldn't get a B&M would maybe want one. And usually they're also cheaper. But, you know, B&M hasn't been successful in those 2 markets. And I think that can definitely be a point of downfall.
Yeah, definitely.
And then the other big thing I think that could lead to the downfall, because of course when we're talking about the decline of B&M, B&M is still one of the most like popular manufacturers. I mean, they got 3 big 2020 coasters coming to just America, and with Candemonium, the Hyper, Orion, the Giga, and Emperor, the dive coaster. So clearly they're still being very successful and selling very expensive coasters to big parks. But the problem lies in that, well, the floorless coaster. I think this is a really important point, is that the B&M floorless coaster, right, that was kind of like one of their biggest models, like one of their most popular throughout like 1999 until like the mid to late 2000s. But then you see that after 2013 Nitro, which was in India, there hasn't been a new ground-up floorless coaster. Of course, there have been the conversions like Firebird, Mantis to Rougarou, Vortex to Patriot, but I think that model was kind of replaced by the wing coaster because, again, similar elements like Blake was saying earlier, just a different ride type, and it offers, like, lots of these parks that already have a floorless can be like, oh, well, we can get a wing as well because, you know, it's something new. But the problem is, as more and more wing coasters get built, because, like I said, it's their most popular model at the moment, well, eventually they're going to probably want to get replaced by something else, except B&M hasn't shown anything new for a new type of ride since 2011 with the wing coaster, except for recent news of the surf coaster at SeaWorld Orlando.
And I really have no clue what this is going to be. Some people have thought it's going to be like the riders kind of standing sideways, but I kind of don't see B&M going that gimmicky route. I just have no clue what they're going to do, because I feel like the surf coaster, I feel like it could blow up in their face, because they're just like, oh,
Yeah.
I guess we have to do something because we haven't done something in a while. I'm kind of nervous for B&M because I don't see them really changing their layouts or anything. I feel like it's just going to be purely a train change, so I really have no clue what they're going to do.
Train change configuration, that worked really well in the late 90s, early 2000s. But I mean, look at these new like manufacturers or old manufacturers that are like reinvigorating their company with the new types of layouts. I mean, RMC, I think, just completely took off. I mean, I already talked about this earlier, how they're kind of analogous to B&M in the 90s, how they made other companies change, like with Arrow making Tennessee Tornado instead of Viper. But, like, you look at RMC, and you see RMC elements on lots of these other coasters. Like, Intamin, of course, I mean, they're already amazing, but, like, for example, Pantheon has this massive Outer Bank turn, like Steel Vengeance, and it has a stall. I mean, that coaster looks right crazy. And then you got SNS, who, besides, like, the Axis coaster, which we'll talk about later with, like, the new Coaster Wars, they, with Steel Curtain, their sit-down looper, I would say is better than most B&M ones in the fact that they incorporate ejector airtime and use lap bars, you know? Like B&M's still using, well, the over-the-shoulders. And yeah, they changed from those old hard ones to the vest restraints, but many people say those are even worse, which is not a good change. And yeah, I guess you could say that B&M has maybe incorporated a little bit of change with, let's say, Orion having that massive wave turn to start, but nothing prominent. I mean, lots of people, it just looks kind of like it's their coasters of old, and like you said, the surf coaster, maybe it is that thing where they're standing to the side, which is kind of cool. I don't know how that'll ride. There hasn't been a coaster like that, so I mean, that is nice, but the thing is, if they're just using their old layouts, which I assume they would, I don't know how well that'll kick off in the industry.
I mean, what I would really like to see is B&M kind of do what Mack did and do the spinning cars, and then so the surf coaster could kind of go from side to side of what side you're doing, but I really don't think that's what the surf coaster is going to be. I would really like to see it.
Yeah,
though.
That would be cool. Unfortunately, probably won't incorporate spinning since that's another field that B&M has never entered. But yeah, I mean, I think people will be a bit skeptical about it being stand-up because, I mean, of course it's hard to get out of the coaster enthusiast bubble, but it doesn't seem like people really respond great to stand-up coasters. I mean, their ridership is traditionally not the highest, especially when more and more of them are converted to floorless. So to bring that back is definitely a risky move, but I think it could have big payoff because we've been talking about how B&M is sort of in this decline where it's like if they keep on making their coasters of old, yeah, it's safe, but they're getting complacent a bit. And that could teeter off because once parks are fulfilled with their wing coasters and dive coasters, well, what else is B&M going to do? Are they just going to cater towards new parks and new markets as less and less new markets are available? So I think that the surf coaster definitely could be their way to enter this new coaster wars. Or it could, of course, be the point of X2 for aerodynamics. Again, B&M has become the era of the late 90s, early 2000s, as RMC has become the B&M of the late 90s, early 2000s. And X2 is awesome, but it did lead to the bankruptcy of aerodynamics. I don't think B&M is close to there yet. Of course, there's a lot of just, looking way out into the future, but it is a bit of a risk, and I think that's cool. So finally, before we end this video, I think it's important to talk about the second Coaster Wars, because it's definitely a bit different than that one that happened at the turn of the millennium, but I think it's kind of integral to this overall argument. So let's elaborate on that.
B&M made Aero irrelevant, and RMC is kind of on the way of making B&M relevant. And when B&M first came out, we were like, oh, these big elements, these are so awesome, so much better than these janky corkscrews and transitions on Aeros.
Exactly, yeah.
Now RMCs, they're kind of making B&M's big, graceful, streamlined elements kind of irrelevant with intensity and good pacing. So I wonder if we will ever get sick of RMC like we kind of have Aero and B&M, because RMC is kind of doing what B&M did and using the same types of elements on every single one of their rides. I think
that's a really interesting argument and something that is I would also love to explore again in a future video, because history repeats itself and coaster history is no exception.
And just when B&M first was getting big, people were probably like, I have no clue how coasters will be able to get better than a polished Chariot and Nitro. But now we have stuff like Steel Vengeance and soon to be Iron Gwazi, and we're going to be like, holy cow, how will we ever innovate past this? So I'm just excited for what the coaster industry has to offer. And B&M has shown us that they can innovate, but they just don't want to.
Yeah, it's true. And I mean, maybe the surf coasters is them finally budging in and being like, well, we don't want to be just rendered to the point of irrelevancy. And I think that is definitely a big move. And I know we keep on talking about this parallel between B&M in the 90s and RMC in the 2010s leading into the 2020s. But it really contributes to this Coaster Wars thing. And that we talked about in the 90s portion, how B&M kind of begot the Coaster Wars of the turn of the millennium. And I would say RMC has kind of done the same nowadays. We talked about recently how lots of these other manufacturers like Intamin and S&S and Vekoma also are incorporating these RMC-like elements and restraints, example, with the lap bars on looping coasters into their rides and vastly improving them. Well, we haven't seen that from B&M really at all. And with this modern Coaster War, it's different than the old one in how that was just sheer quantity, seeing every Six Flags and Cedar Fair Park get 3 coasters per year. I mean, that's impressive, but obviously the economy can't do that nowadays. And of course we don't know how coronavirus is gonna impact this new Coaster Wars, but we've kind of been seeing it develop over the past few years as there's been a return to like new ride types and innovation. Like, yeah, RMC right now, they kind of do the same type of layouts on most of their rides, but still, I mean, I think incorporating the Raptors to have even tighter rides, and then of course T-Rex when that comes out, are big advancements. And then of course the SNS with the Axis coaster, insane. Vekoma keeps on going with these great sit-down loopers, and then whenever Fly opens at Phantasialand, that's going to be the first flying launch coaster. That is a big deal, and they could actually steal back that flying coaster crown from B&M if this goes well.
Okay, just before we end, what are 2 pieces of advice that you would give to B&M?
I would say first, B&M has got to look at the modern industry and be like, what parts of this ride, or like the popular parts of like RMCs and other ones, can we incorporate into our design while still retaining that like B&M spark, the reliability, and just like the overall capacity that's made them an industry favorite and a crowd pleaser for so long. And, incorporate that into our rides. Like, for example, maybe more ejector hills, a trick track double up style thing. I mean, just imagine like a dive coaster having like crazy ejector. And the other thing is to keep on looking into a new type of ride to shock the industry. Because there's, of course, the one strategy of like, looking at the modern industry and kind of adapting yourself to it and keep on doing that. But if you want to really advance and be at the industry forefront like they were in the 90s with the inverts and the dives, etc., well, you got to have new types. And I think the surf coaster could be a great start to that. But I think they really need to look at other types of things to do because, I mean, think about every major manufacturer seems to be doing something to advance it. I mean, the Mack Extreme spinning coasters, crazy. SNS with the Axis and maybe bigger free spin coasters, awesome. You got Intamin just making just Intamin coasters. I mean, they do it all. So they're one of the like ones where they don't need to be doing new ride types. They can just be doing crazy coasters like Pantheon, and people will love them. And eventually, I feel like Intamin will be the one to re-break their speed and height records because that's what Intamin does. You got RMC making Raptors and T-Rexes. You got Vekoma doing these like really awesome launch coasters, and then like Fly, like the flying launch coaster. Where does B&M fit in? So, of course, then before we end out, what are your biggest pieces of advice, Blake?
This is gonna sound a little crazy, but I think B&M should go to maybe making some 2 across rides because I think part of the reason why B&M hasn't been making these crazy transition like rides that go every which direction is that the track is so big and it's 4 across and that you can't really you don't have as much you can't maneuver as tight,
especially
maneuvers.
The dive coasters, 8 across or 10 across or 6 across.
It's so spaced out. So I think they should thin the track and make it a lot smaller track so they can do cooler elements. And I think just making
that's awesome.
Sit-down B&Ms or anything like that just with 2 across, because that way you can make crazier elements and more likely to innovate. Definitely. But I don't think that's ever going to happen.
That's true, yeah. Well, to add on to that point, part of the reason B&Ms are so expensive is because their track is so big because they have these really wide cars. Well, small of the cars, smaller track, cheaper ride, more people are going to buy it. More parks are going to buy it because, I think that's a really great point you made, and it works in many ways.
Allow for more airtime and just more crazy stuff.
Exactly. And of course, it's, again, we're thinking from the coaster enthusiast perspective, but the public does also want crazy rides. Yeah. I mean, ones that they want to talk home about. And yeah, maybe in 1999, they're going to tell their friends about Bizarro, how there was no floor, and that was insane. But nowadays, Orion, Candymonium, Emperor, they're going to be great coasters, but are they going to be stuff that's going to secure B&M's place as, industry innovators?
In the roller coaster
I don't think so. Exactly. In the roller coaster pantheon, B&M is faltering. So, I think that concludes it, basically. Big points are B&M, they can get back to their 90s heyday. They still have retained the popularity. This isn't Aero going into bankruptcy in the late 90s. But they could be taking steps towards that if they keep on making these super expensive coasters that limited parks can buy, and that don't really follow with industry trends. So yeah, basically, I know that was a lot, but thank you so much, Blake, for joining in. I really appreciated your takes. I thought there were some really just excellent points you made. B&M, if you're watching this by any chance, I would love to see some of these things incorporated. Make a Trick Track double up flying coaster with rows of 2, and you'll have your place secured in the industry for a very long time.
B&M is still a spectacular manufacturer. There's a
Yeah,
reason
of course.
why they stay around for so long, and the rides are so fun.
B&M, we'd love it if you'd step up your game, because we love your coasters and we want to see you keep on kicking and making bigger and badder creations. So thank you all so much for watching. Thank you again, Blake, for tuning in. And I hope you enjoyed this video. Comment down below your take on B&M, the history, the decline, whatever. And also, we'd love to hear any ideas you'd have for future video essay topics to discuss. So, thank you. Like and subscribe for more awesome coaster videos. This is the Coaster Craze, and my good friend Blake, signing off. Goodbye.